You eagle-eye viewers are going to notice right away that that's not the same engine we started with last week. And I'll get to that in a minute. But before I do that, I want to explain how we're going to do this series, because it's going to be pretty lengthy. First, you have to understand one of the quirks about YouTube. YouTube uses average view duration as one of the metrics as to whether or not a video gets put out. Once a video gets past about 15 minutes or so, the average view duration starts to really plummet. So to make several long videos, it means that it won't get out there. So we're going to break this into like 15-minute, 20-minute or so segments. I'm going to cover each of the main components, each of the main steps individually, and then we'll put together a playlist. And it'll act as a better reference material that way too, because down the road, let's say you're only concerned about crankshafts. You can go right to the crankshaft video and it'll have that in there. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we're not doing a specific engine, it's my specific engine, but this is a general video. So, while I know the minute details, hang on, I gotta shut the heater. Well, I know all of the minute details of this particular engine and its design parameters. I don't know what you're working with. So very, very important. You need to have all of the literature concerning your engine. You need to know all of the specifications, or at least have them at your disposal. And if possible, find a forum or a Facebook group or anything like that focuses on your particular type of engine, because down the road you may need to ask very specific questions. What you can get away with, what idiosyncrasies to your exact engine. So that said, let's talk about this real quick. We pulled an engine off the core pile to build. It was frozen solid, locked. So I popped a couple of caps off. It wasn't an oil starvation thing. The pistons were just rusted to the cylinder walls. So I spent a lot of time. I pretty much killed the whole day trying to get this thing freed up. And I got 5 of the 8 pistons out, and then I found a cracked cylinder wall. I mean, like a really badly cracked cylinder wall. So that block, because these engines, the ones that I'm working with here, are pretty much a dime a dozen, it's not worth putting a sleeve in it. So it's been cast off to the scrap pile. And here's a tip: if you guys are trying to free an engine, okay, here's what I do. So you've tried everything else and this thing won't move. Take a step bit and drill a hole through the piston right here. Do it off to the, don't center it because you got the pin to contend with. Take a step bit, drill a hole through the piston, and then take a Sawzall and make a cut and make a cut. And what that'll do is you just tap that a couple of times, it'll break itself out, and that gives the piston clearance to be pushed out without destroying the cylinder wall, without killing yourself. So that's that. So we have our raw block here. And now the next step is we need to determine what machine work it's going to need. We have to have a plan for the engine. Like I have a plan for this engine, but it's irrelevant to the context of this video. You have to have a plan for your engine. You need to know what you're looking to get out of it. In the context of this video, we're not talking about all-out race motors, we're not talking about exotics, we're talking about the typical engine, that typical street car, daily driver or street strip car, basic stuff, nothing exotic. We're not covering McLarens here, we're covering the stuff that the average person works with in the average ways. So, we need to know several things about this block before we send it off to a machine shop. The first is, are we going to overbore it? Now, overboring is a standard practice. There's nothing wrong with it. But always keep in mind that it weakens the block. So you take an engine with a 4-inch bore and you go 60 over with it, you're adding, 5 cubic inches, 6 cubic inches, whatever it is. It's irrelevant as far as the car's performance goes. You're kicking up the compression just a tiny, tiny hair because, but at the same time, you're weakening the block. You always, anytime you take material off the block, you're weakening it. You need to know what the outer limits of your exact block are. Okay, so now I deal with Chrysler products, and all of the Chrysler products in the area that I deal with are all cast to take a maximum 60 overbore. Meaning that Unless it's a drastic situation, and I have never come across this, I can go up to 60 thousandths of an inch with this block without having to, let's say, have it sonic checked for thickness. I don't have to worry about that. Unless it's a block that has severe core shift, it's a real, it's junk, you don't have to worry about it. These engines, I know, will go up to 60 thousandths of an inch. That's not to say yours will. So that's again where you have to do your research and find out what the maximum standard overbore is. If you're only needing a slight overbore, one of the biggest expenses of rebuilding an engine is pistons. You start at 300 and you go all the way up. I mean, you can spend a lot of money on pistons. You're building just a regular driver, and all you want to do is just get rid of the ridge or just clean up the cylinder a little bit. You can go up to 10 thousandths of an inch overbore on a 4-inch bore motor, as an average, and reuse the stock piston. You use 10 over rings, but they're designed that way. A cleanup bore, a 10 thousandths of an inch bore, will retake the stock piston. It won't slap around, it won't make all kinds of noise. You're only adding 5 thousandths of an inch piston to wall clearance. So take that for what it's worth. Now, we need to know, I know I'm going to overbore this motor. I know it's got a pretty decent ridge here. So this is a step I wouldn't take for myself, but this is a step you need to take. So, first thing we need to do is determine the quality of the cylinder walls, assuming that you're not going to have a board. So what we do is wet it down with a lubricant. I use gasoline. If you're freaked out by gasoline, you can use brake fluid, you can use transmission fluid, you can use all sorts of things. Use a fixed stone hone. Do not use a dingleberry on this. Dingleberry hones are very useful, and I use them when they're appropriate. They're appropriate when you have an engine that you know is straight and true, and you're just going to re-ring it, and all you want to do is just put a crosshatch in it. So with a dingleberry hone, you're just going shh, shh, shh. But here's the thing. If, let's say, you've got a cylinder that's hourglass shaped, okay, and you use a dingleberry hone on it, you're going to put a perfect crosshatch into an hourglass shaped cylinder. It doesn't work for that. That's why you use a fixed stone hone, one that has, they're not going to move. And you want to use just, for this, doesn't matter which abrasive, which grit you use. So you wet down that cylinder. And you just want to do this just to clean it up, just to get whatever fuzz or, there we go, that's nice. Fuzz or rust or oil or anything like that. And you just want to clean it up. Don't worry about if you're getting a perfect crosshatch, because all you're going to do now is just check the quality of this cylinder. So what you do is you take an old ring, one of the ones you pulled out of the motor, then you install it like so into the cylinder. Actually, you know what? Let's wipe this thing down. You don't want to have any oil or anything that can get between the cylinder wall and the ring. So you install the ring like this, square it up, and at the top of the bore, shine a light from underneath and check around the perimeter of the ring to see if you see any light poking through. I don't see anything there. That looks good. So now we're going to move it down to mid-bore. And this will tell you if the cylinder is hourglass shaped or out of round. I'm just going to square it with my fingers. Okay. And we'll do the same thing here. Now I'm shining a light from underneath and looking all the way around the ring, and I see absolutely no light. This cylinder here is perfectly round. So again now, if you're dealing with, let's say, a later model engine, late model engines, fuel injected, computer ignition engines, generally don't develop this ridge at the top. So if you're dealing with a later model engine and you still see some crosshatch and it doesn't have that ridge, this is all you really need to do to know whether or not you've got to bore that cylinder or not. So that's that. Now, the next step, now here's the thing. I have a trusted machine shop. I use Shacklets in Nashville. I've been using them since I got here to Tennessee. I trust them with everything. They're great. But, you know, I don't know the machine shop you're dealing with. And the general rule of thumb is a machine shop has never met a surface that didn't need to be reworked. This is how they make a living, okay? So if you hand them a block and you say, here, do whatever you got to do to the thing, they're going to do everything to it. Does the block need to be decked? This is your next thing to check. So what I do is wet down the deck here. This one's a little dirtier. That will do this one. Wet down the deck. I use a piece of emery cloth wrapped around a paint stirrer. You can use a block of wood, right? But this works just fine for the purpose. And what you want to do is give it an even. I'm going to dance around the dowels here. I didn't pull the dowels out. It's a good idea to pull these dowels out, but for right now, for the purposes of this, so I'm going to give it a cross hatch. Trying to maintain an even just like that, okay? Now we give it a rinse. Okay. And you should see any low spots in the deck right away. So and here we have a slight low spot. See where it's shiny and then get a little bit of a low spot there. But just because it's colored like that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. Your next step is you need your trusted straight edge. I've been using this thing for years. It's never let me down. You can also use like a level, an aluminum level, as long as there's any dings or dents in it. You know, that'll work fine. Okay? And you take your light again. There we go. I'm not seeing any light. This deck is true. This is a good deck. I'll do the same on this side. So yeah, we won't be surfacing the deck on this. We're just going to have them bored. There's one other check you do with a straight edge and a light, and does this thing need to be line bored, line honed? And that's in the main bearing. Now I still have the crank in this because we're going to do the crankshaft the next installment. But you check the crank the same way with a straight edge. You have the crank out, saddle's cleaned, lay the straight edge through the motor, and then check in between the straight edge and each cap and each upper saddle. Do it in like 3 places. If you don't see any light, it's straight. She doesn't need to be line honed or bored. If by some chance you ever spun a bearing or the engine saw a lot of heat, go ahead and have it done. What else? All right. Do you want to hot tank this thing, or do you want to just wash it? A machine shop's going to wash it no matter what because they have to handle it, and after they're done they have to get all of their grit off of it, so they're going to wash it. But there's also hot tanking. Hot tanking is when the motor is submerged in a caustic solution for X amount of time, and it's boiled, and any gack that's built up inside of it flows out. Now this is a personal phobia of mine, okay? Don't take this as gospel. This is just me, and this is just experience over many, many years of doing this stuff. I have a cam bearing phobia, meaning that I've found that and it doesn't matter who puts them in, how careful they are, how much experience they have. What I have found over the years is that cam bearing failure seems to be the #1 cause of complete rebuild engine issues. What happens is, over the course of the engine's life, things shift around just a little bit. And in these V8 engines, where the cam lies is in the center of the core, okay? All you need is 1/1000th or 2 of an inch shift, and those cam bearings are no longer either completely round or completely in line. Now, when it happens gradually over the course of 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 miles, those bearings will wear. Everything kind of becomes happy, right? They'll wear into line, where they'll wear themselves round on the surface, even if they're not round on the outside. When you boil a block, when you hot take a block, you have to replace the cam bearings because the acid destroys them. And so that's why I try not to replace cam bearings unless it's absolutely necessary. And there are times when it's necessary. No problem. If you look at the bearings and you see scuff marks, or for instance, let's say you're dealing with like an FE Ford where you've got oil passages behind the bearings that have to be cleaned out, well then, yeah, by all means, change the cam bearings. But what I'll do is I'll give them a visual inspection. And if the cam bearings look good, right, I don't see any weirdness or anything like that on them, I let them slide. I leave them alone. And just stick to washing the block. If I see weirdnesses on the cam bearings, and if they look worn, then knock them out and boil the block. The other thing you want to do before you send this thing off to the machine shop is knock the core plugs out of it. So, these things are already toast. See, here's one that looks perfect on the outside. Look at this, right? Looks solid. Look how rusted this is on the inside. If you want to knock this thing the rest of it, yeah. When you're pulling these things out, be very careful of this surface. I try not to use sealer when I put these things back together again. The factory doesn't use sealer. If you nick the surface or it's pitted, then yeah, you want to. But yeah, be careful when you're taking these things out. You don't mar up the surface any. So here we have a situation where we may want to, before we send this thing off, if we're not going to have it boiled, we may want to go through this whole block here. We'll fish that out later. So yeah, you want to knock all these core plugs out of here. Look how much stuff is in there. And you want to get as much, look at this. You want to loosen as much of this stuff up as possible. That's all. This is all silicone. Right? This is exactly the kind of thing that break loose and get caught up in your thermostat, or so. And you see, there's a lot of. Look at all this rust in here. You're doing this at home. Knock all of this. Knock everything you can loose that's in there. Look at this. This is all old sealer. Get in there. Knock all of this stuff loose. Take your time, right? Generally speaking, you can get all the way around. If you knock all of the core plugs out, you can get all the way around. You can get in between the cylinders, you can get to the deck over here, right? Poke it, scrape it, use coat hangers, use whatever you have, thin screwdrivers, get everything in there, and then flush it all out with water. If it's really, really rusty, like, you know, like fleeky rust, have it boiled, and then look into different ways. There are many different ways to seal that rust. So I think I covered everything I wanted to talk about with the block. I'm going to go ahead and knock the rest of these out this afternoon, and the next installment I'm going to talk about the crankshaft, how to check it, when to cut, when not to cut, when to polish, when not to polish, and connecting rods. So we'll do that next day or two. And I think that's it for this installment. Yeah? All right. See you tomorrow.